Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Idiosyncratic Fables, a part of Wilderness Fire Productions, where we are cultivating the passion for books, audiobooks, and overall storytelling. Since time first began, we have been storytellers. Everybody's got a story to tell, and I want to hear yours. I'm your host, James, also known as the Kilted Narrator, and today I'm joined by Marc Ross, corporate lawyer, Stanford Law graduate, and the author of two sharp, timely thrillers, The Conscripted Extremist and Attacking the Dragon. After decades of working on high-stakes international deals and spending significant time in China, Marc turned to fiction and began writing stories that blend real-world geopolitics, political extremism, and pulse-pounding suspense. His latest novel, Attacking the Dragon, explores terrorist attacks aimed at undermining China's global ambitions and has already earned multiple book festival honors. In this conversation, we'll talk about the path from corporate boardrooms to thriller writing, how his experience in China shapes his stories, the challenges of writing about charged political topics, and what's next, including a possible limited series adaptation. Marc, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I am so thrilled that you are here, sir.
James, it's an absolute pleasure, and you get bonus points right off for getting the word conscripted right. It is a tongue twister.
That it is. And in my industry of audiobook narration, I am all too familiar with tongue twister words, even ones that shouldn't be.
I'm very pleased to be here. I've listened to some of your work, and I think you do a great job, and I'm sure your audience really appreciates it. So I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. Now, let's just go ahead and kick things off, or without further ado, whatever cliche people are using nowadays, let's begin.
All righty.
You've had a long career as a corporate lawyer specializing in international deals, including significant work involving China. What first drew you into law, and how did that path eventually lead you to writing thrillers?
Well, that's a great question. I have a lot of ties to the law, as my grandfather had a well-known law firm back during his days, which was basically gone by the time I was ready to practice law, so that wasn't an option. But what happened was I was debating whether to go to law school or to try and make it as a writer. And back then, as my last year of college, it was like, well, if I could be a writer and be a great literary writer, that would be great. If I could write like Saul Bellows, Norman Mailer, people like that. But I admitted to myself that no, I'd write more like the popular writers of the time, Jacqueline Suzanne, Harold Robbins, and that wasn't what I wanted to do back then. So I went to law school, went to Stanford, as you said, and became a lawyer and practiced law, put the writing completely aside for decades, frankly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, being a lawyer and a corporate lawyer can keep you rather busy. So it wasn't that I was lacking for things to do. And I think it was around COVID where I was home and I picked up the pen, so to speak, the computer, and began playing around with it a bit and came up with some ideas. But the first thing had to be to say, well, what is my goal? And now, at this point, having had and still practicing law, mixing it with the writing, it wasn't that I had to be a Pulitzer Prize winning author. It was to write things that were fun for me to write, and I thought people would enjoy and are original. I don't want to write anything that you can say, oh, I read a book, just like that recently. So that's what sort of got me going, and I got some ideas for both my books and for another book that I'm trying to place right now, just by thinking about different things and what would be interesting. The Attack Dragon sort of plays off the idea that yes, I do have experience regarding China. And I figured, well, I should take advantage of what I know and people I know, places I've been, and my understanding of the politics and things like that. And let me be clear, I don't pretend to be a global expert on China. That's a tough role to fill, and I don't pretend to qualify. But I think I know enough for this, and several people who do know China very well have read the book, and they say I didn't mess it up too bad. So,
good.
feel good about it. Yeah. But, I was thinking about China, and in Western literature, all the books, thriller books, spy books, military books involving China, China's always the bad guy. China is hacking us. China's ghost fleet is attacking us. All that sort of stuff. China's spying on us. And I didn't want to write another one of those. So I flipped it around. And here, China is the target of terrorist attacks. And I think it's fair to say, I don't know of a single other Western book that, flips it around like that, that has China not being the aggressor from day one.
And none come to mind for me.
No, they don't. And I spent a good amount of time, and I still continue to keep an eye on it as I'm working on the sequel, which we can talk about later. But when I started thinking about, okay, how do terrorists or somebody attack China? How do you hurt China? I don't think it's by invading China. That's a rather difficult task, and I don't think would be a particularly believable subject. But China has something called its Belt and Road Initiative, which has been going on for a number of years now, where with the help of the Chinese government, Chinese companies build infrastructure projects in different countries throughout the world. And they do this as a means of establishing relationships, making these countries dependent upon China. I call it economic colonialism in a sense. And the way this works is, and most of this is with undeveloped or developing countries, but not all of it. China's done projects in over 140 countries. So this is a very, very big thing. And it's really China's main means of global expansion. And as they build these plants and infrastructure projects, airports, harbors, things like that, the Chinese government and Chinese banks will lend the foreign country money to pay for this. Most of the work is done by Chinese construction companies. So while they use local labor, but most of the money then cycles back to China to pay these companies, and the foreign country is now left with hopefully a great new project that it has, new airport or whatever, but it owes China a lot of money. And that's how it basically works. Unfortunately, a lot of them haven't worked out too well. And at this point, China is owed over 1.2 trillion with a T, $trillion for these. In some cases, it's basically taken over ownership of them, or they restructured the debt. So, and some of the projects haven't worked out too well. For instance, a dam in South America, had to take it out of service. However, one takes a dam out of service, because I don't know the answer to that either, because it was because of cracks in it. So my point is, having all these projects in different countries made a very viable target for terrorist attacks. So that's where it all started, using these as places for attacks.
Wow. You mentioned once appearing as a co-host on the Conan O'Brien show. How did that come about, and what's the story behind that one?
Right. What happened is, years ago, there was a charity special, I think on HBO, called The Night of Too Many Stars. And different comedians came on and did shticks, and they were raising money. And so, pulled out the credit card and made a donation. And they were giving away prizes. Not that anyone expects to win, but they were giving away prizes. And I know, for instance, that one woman won as a prize the opportunity to sit under Stephen Colbert's desk during a taping of his show, which is a rather odd thing to win.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although I'm told that Jon Stewart was under there with her. So God knows. But anyway, several months later, I got a phone call from Conan's show that I had won the opportunity to be what they called a co-host on the show. So we eventually got a date set. They flew my wife and I out there, and I appeared throughout the show. Andy Richter used to stand there with his little mobile desk, and I had mine, and I brought it out and stood next to him and went back and forth with Conan, and then sat on the couch during the show. And it was a lot of fun. And Conan, they grilled me as to what would be interesting to talk about. And so I told them about one episode that happened to me in China, and they built a whole skit around it and a whole production around it. What this is, and this wouldn't happen today, but when I first went to China, things have changed so much. Westerners still weren't an everyday occurrence. There was a lot of us around, but we weren't overwhelming the place. And several Chinese women, and this is the truth, asked me if I was Richard Gere.
Huh.
Now, your audience can't see me, but if they go to my website, www.amarcross.com, they could see a picture of me, and they will agree. I do not look like Richard Gere.
No, you don't.
No. And they were focusing on Richard Gere in Pretty Woman, where he's got gray hair, comb, look very businesslike, wearing glasses, which I do. I happen to be probably 6 inches or so taller than he is, but who knows? So this happened to me, I'd say 3 or 4 times on my first 2 trips. And so what we did on Conan, when that story came out, was first they brought in some Chinese actresses to sit in the audience. And when Conan told them this, they start talking in Chinese about, there's this man who looks kind of like Richard Gere, but not really. And it was very funny. And then we filmed before the show ran a pseudo commercial with, if you remember, there's a scene with Julia Roberts taking a bubble bath in the movie.
Yes.
So they had me standing there, and I'm wearing a suit, holding up bubble bath, a bottle of bubble bath, and we did a whole bit. I'm the Richard Gere of China, and when I'm here, I sell bubble bath, and did a whole bit with that. It was very funny. And if you go to YouTube and search Richard Gere and Conan O'Brien, you can actually still find it all these years later.
Oh, wow.
And it was fun. I really enjoyed it. And they were very, very nice to me.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, Conan seems like the kind of guy that both on and off camera, he's just a real genuine, pleasant guy to be around.
Yeah, I had no idea what to expect, and, worried because he's so sharp and so quick that as good as we may think we are at repartee, you wouldn't want to get into that with him. But it was all fine. It was all delightful and a very cherished memory.
Fantastic. Let's move into your writing journey and process. You published short fiction earlier in life, including a story in Galaxy, then stepped away for decades, like you were talking about earlier backstage. What brought you back to fiction writing, and why during the COVID period specifically?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm shocked about your knowing about the Galaxy short story. That is very, very impressive that you unearthed that. And I'll just say for your listeners, the editor of Galaxy magazine, which unfortunately no longer exists, but was one of the science fiction magazines like Amazing Stories and things like that.
Right.
Called it, took my title, which was "Take My Mate, Take My Mate, Please," and he subtitled it "A Space Oddity," which I think is a bit of a statement as to what he thought of it. But he bought it and he published it, so who am I to complain? And it's so that was my one, venture with that, trying to publish, and it was very nice. And really, I just put it aside and didn't even think about it for many, many years. Every so often, somebody would say, like my mother was very good at saying, well, why don't you try writing again? You published that story. Very much what a mother would say. But I did not. And it wasn't until COVID really that I really began to think about it and started almost playing around, writing things down, and then came up with an idea where I would start the first book. Is really what got me going, sort of a reversal of an early 20th century novel by a man by the name of Chesterton, who was a very popular writer in English writer in the early 20th century. And I happened to enjoy this particular book. And the ending of his book has a whole bunch of people together who are supposedly bad guys, anarchists, which were the bad guys of their day. And it turns out none of them really are. They're all either government agents or something else, and they're all sort of chasing each other around futilely. I started my first book saying, I'm going to take that idea and move it to the beginning of the book, where I put a whole bunch of people in a jail cell. And some of them are what you think they are. Most of them aren't. And we sort of worked from there. And I had no idea where it was going other than starting with that premise on that book. On the second book, Attacking the Dragon, I knew that I wanted it to be terrorist attacks against China's Belt and Road Initiative. And I knew even before I started writing what the ending was going to be, which is a bit of a surprise ending. So I don't want to get too much into that.
Yeah.
And I just had to get then from page one all the way to the end and figure that part out in between.
How does your legal training and experience with high stakes negotiations and international business influence the way you construct plots and characters?
Well, I think it's a positive in the sense of the analytic aspect of it, to say that, the plot is following along in a logical order, the characters are flowing logically and things like that. But beyond that, and the knowledge that I have, for instance, one of my heroes, or my hero in Attacking the Dragon, is a businessman. So, understanding of business and being able to weave that in, not that business plays a significant role here, helps. But legal writing and fiction writing are very different. And at first, actually, I had to sort of stop being legalistic and not use legal terms, which I might use in drafting a contract, but take them out of the manuscript. And my wife was very helpful in saying, you sound like a lawyer on this page. Take that out. So, it was in that sense evolution. But I've noticed that a lot of lawyers, right? In fact, the biggest book out right now is Theo of Golden, I think it's called. And it's number one on the New York Times bestseller list of fiction. Okay. And it's written by a retired lawyer.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. Give him a world of credit.
Yeah.
Sat How down long and would did it big time.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
That's all right.
How long would you say it takes to complete a first draft? And then how do you revise based on feedback?
Oh. It just takes me maybe 3 months to do the first draft. I would say, and I do not sit down and do it full time every day. I'll spend maybe 5 hours doing it. Right now, I happen to be very busy on the legal side, so I've had to put to the side at the moment the book I'm working on. So I have to come back to that. So that one will take longer, but I'd say it takes about that long. And then I go through numerous drafts. I've got people who read it and give me their feedback. And I go through all of that before I start trying to market it in any way.
Gotcha. Now, your books, both of them, they blend fast-paced thriller elements with real-world political and geopolitical issues. How do you strike the balance between entertainment and grounding the stories in reality?
Um, you can use reality and just lay down some of the basis of the facts and take off from there. So, I take the reality of China having the global initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, and the United States can't be pleased with it, but we're not carrying out terrorist attacks against it. So it's sort of like taking that premise and saying, all right, how do you then take the fact that this exists and you want to do something about it and making it exciting for the reader?
Right.
Same thing in my first book, where what happens is the government forces a young lawyer to get involved in infiltrating the extreme left wing, the Antifa. And in fact, when the Trump administration announced at one point that they were going to go after Antifa and try and find them, my friends teased me that they must have read my first book, and that's where they got the idea. Now, I don't believe that that's quite the case, but that was a case of reality following fiction.
Sure. You actually kind of answered two of my questions that I had specifically about the conscripted extremist. Given that the protagonist is a young lawyer, how much of your own legal background or observations and inform the character and the plot?
A, a decent amount. The background I laid for him does bear some resemblance to my own background, that he sort of ended up being a corporate lawyer rather than that having been his plan from day one. And that certainly was not my plan. It just worked out that way. And I enjoy it. I'm not knocking it at all. And I've made it, done well with it. But so in that sense, it's similar. And I used my experience in law firms to show what it's like for him in the law firm, and what it's like trying to deal with the problems he's confronting while practicing in a firm, and what happens to him, and their reception of it, which doesn't necessarily go over particularly well with them. And I also included one or two incidents from my own experience in the book. For instance, I was negotiating with a deal, and the lawyer on the other side was just being horrible, just bombastic, taking ridiculous points, being rude, just things that were not necessary and weren't going to get the deal done. And this was a man probably in his 50s at the time. I was probably in my early to mid 30s. And I asked him to step out of the room with me for a minute. And I basically told him that if he doesn't stop it and behave, I'm going to kill the deal right then and there. And his clients who were selling their business are going to lose several $1 million. And he asked me, will your clients do that? And I said, yeah, they'll do what I recommend on this point. And he went back into the room and suddenly behaved really nicely, really reasonably. And we made the deal. And it all happened. And I stole that and stuck it in the book.
Nice.
So my hero, Gabriel, gets to do that to somebody.
Very cool. Now, the book itself, was a finalist for a Next Generation Indie Book Award. What has the
Yes,
response from readers been like, especially given how timely the themes have remained?
people enjoy it. People recognize the reality in it. Although, again, it takes reality and takes another step, because ultimately, what happens is not something we see in the papers every day. But that's probably true of most thrillers, or many of them at least. You take it beyond what you see, but it is, as they say, torn from the pages of the newspaper,
Right.
and people enjoy it. What was interesting about that one is one side of the political spectrum comes out more negative than the other in terms of how the characters act. And what I tried very hard to do was to balance that in a way that it wouldn't be the case that readers on that side of the political aisle would not want to read the book. I very much tried to stay in the middle and show issues on the other side of it. And in fact, the book I recently wrote and am now have with various agents a sequel to that. And here, the other side is much more guilty of bad behavior, shall we say. So I've sort of flipped it around to give each side the opportunity to be no good.
Gotcha. Let's see. Attacking the Dragon is a story that follows an American businessman and a U.S. ambassador as they hunt the perpetrators across the continents. What interested you in pairing those two perspectives, and how did the romantic element develop?
Well, the American businessman, uh, I have to say, sort of works off of my time in trips to China, although he is much more successful than I or virtually anybody I know. I mean, he is a true star of China American business deals, and he's got connections in with many Chinese executives, Chinese members, professionals, members of the Chinese Communist Party, as well as the government. So starting with me and transforming him into that, and then giving him a significant role, provided the opportunity to weave him in. So in fact, he's on his, in the first 2 pages of the book, he is summoned to meet with a very high-ranking Chinese governmental figure, member of the party. And on page 2, a bomb goes off and clobbers them all.
Oh,
So well, but he lived. He lives. They live. Not giving any. I'm not going to tell you what happens on page 3, but that's what happens on pages 1 and 2.
there you have it, listener. No spoilers for you yet. You
Yeah,
got to get the
actually,
books.
the first 2 or 3 chapters can be read on my website. Apparently, that's what one does these days. So there's a few pages there to see whether you like it. And why her? A major terrorist attack takes place in an African country. And I had to figure out, okay, I wanted to involve an American figure in that. So who do I get if a major terrorist attack is taking place in this African country? Who's going to be my American figure that I slot in? And I decided, and this is a small country, that an American ambassador would be a very logical person to bring in. Offer America's help after this has happened, but because it's a Chinese-built infrastructure project, that China doesn't want the U.S.'s help. In fact, China's initial reaction is to wonder whether the U.S. is responsible.
Right.
And China spends much of the book wondering whether the U.S. is responsible, and also wondering whether my character, West, the businessman, is somehow responsible for it, because he seems to be in the wrong place at the wrong time on more than one occasion. So that's how I came up with her. And I brought them together by having the State Department reach out for him as to advice as to how to deal with this China problem that was existing in Africa. And the two of them then have to go to China to address the political issues around this and make it clear that the U.S. has no involvement in this. And if China says otherwise publicly, there's going to be a lot of trouble. And that brings them together. Not surprisingly, in books like this, they're both rather attractive figures, both very intelligent, charismatic, etc. And thus, not surprisingly, they end up romantically involved. But it's a problem relationship because she's the ambassador to a country in Africa. So she's spending her time in Africa.
Yeah.
He lives here on the East Coast of the United States. So it's your ultimate long distance relationship for a while. But we'll address that further in the sequel.
Yeah. Wow. Now, the book itself has already picked up several festival recognitions. What does that early recognition mean to you as a relatively new novelist?
Well, obviously, it's pleasing. I enjoy it, appreciate it, and but it makes you say that you want more. So you can't win every contest. So if I didn't win another one, I'm like, why not? How could I not?
Yeah.
And it builds up expectations. But it is very pleasing and rewarding. And I think I'd be very disappointed at this point when I publish the next one if it didn't get meaningful recognition like this. So I've sort of built a mentality of expectations about that. Same way as you mentioned early on, we are trying to turn the conscripted extremist into one of these limited episode series.
Right.
And a script is with two of the major Hollywood production houses. They haven't said yes, but they haven't said no. So it sits and we wait and see what happens. And, you sort of build these expectations about it. Now, I will say that when I started writing, that was not in my game plan. I never gave that a thought, but I was approached to do it. So we did it and worked with a guy who's a really good script writer. And together we did it. And what's interesting to me is, and I'd never read a script before, how much of the script turns out to be the dialogue out of the book. As versus the descriptions of what's going on or the movements. And I learned that so much of that is left to the director and the actors, that you get to provide the words, but they do so much of the rest. And so I was very pleased that so much of the dialogue ended up in it.
That's awesome. What are you most excited about exploring in your next novels?
Well, the follow-up to the Conscripted Extremist, which is called the Committed Extremists, plural. I figured I had to stay with something like that. Again, is political, and again, I think is something that you haven't seen before. And that's what I like. I, again, came up with a premise, which was novel, and took it from there. So I would say that everything I write, I want it to be something that people will enjoy, that they'll say it's good. I don't want them to be able to point to something else and say it's just like so-and-so's book, or it's too much like that.
Right.
And that's sort of, how I go, which is not to be negative about other books.
Sure.
And, there are a lot of great writers. And I don't pretend to be a great writer like so many of, our leading writers these days, even the thriller writers. Like I think Walter Mosley, for instance, is just absolutely a fabulous, fabulous writer. I love his work. So no, I have no pretension of trying to write like Walter Mosley, but I do try and write in a way that I think the readers will say it fits the genre, and hopefully a lot of people want to see it, want to read it.
That's fantastic. So, got a couple more questions here before we draw it to a close, Mark. Looking back, what's been the biggest surprise or most rewarding part of becoming a published author after a full legal career?
I'd say the biggest surprise is the surprise that other people have had that I'm doing this. If you're a lawyer or business lawyer, you've got clients, and for them, you play a certain role. You're an advisor, you're a negotiator. Sometimes you've got to be the heavy vis-a-vis other parties. So it's a certain image they have of you. And now when they see, oh, he's written this thriller book and it's completely different, it's very shocking to them. It's a very different person. The writing style is completely different than the way, I'd write a contract. So that's been one of the surprises that other people have had. For me, surprise, I'd say how much I've learned about it, how much I've learned about how to do this. I look back at the first draft of the first book and look at, the finished product then and the finished product now. And I'd like to think that I've come a good ways. So that's been very gratifying as I learn more and more about how to do this. Maybe some people could just sit down and just whip off the perfect book first try. But this has been a great learning experience and something that I will continue to do for many years.
Good deal. And then finally, where can listeners find your books and follow your work?
That's a great question, James. Both books are available on Amazon in both paperback and in ebooks, Kindle books. So that's one place to go. For Attacking the Dragon, they can also go to my website, which, like I said, is www.amarc with a C. That was my mother's creativity, Mark with a C. So www.amarcross.com. And there you can buy a paperback copy. Actually, you can buy an autographed paperback copy. The other thing you can do, if you go to the website, on the cover of the book, there's a businessman carrying a briefcase walking towards a dragon in the background, a symbol of a dragon. Some people who worked with us have now created a very short JPEG of a dragon with flames. It's animated with flames coming out of its mouth. So it's a fire-breathing dragon. And it is really cool. So I would say just go there for the fun of it and seeing this, fire-breathing dragon. It's very cool. And that's where you can find the book. And if the fire-breathing dragon convinces you to check it out further, all the better.
I'm definitely going to go check it out as soon as you and I are done here, Mark. That sounds really cool.
It is. Thanks, James.
And Mark, thank you for agreeing to be on the show today. I really appreciate your time and your expertise that is evident in both books that you've presented so far. It's just been fantastic. I've enjoyed our moment together. Thank you.
So have I very much. And thank you. And thank all your listeners.
Absolutely. You heard it here first, folks. Mark and I both thank you for tuning into this episode. If you enjoyed it, I ask that you please rate it, review it, and even subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts, because it helps me to reach more storytellers just like you. I also invite you to drop me a line on social media or even email me directly of who you would love to hear next, or even if you personally would love to be a guest on the show. Also, I host a Discord server where I showcase my behind-the-scenes work of audiobook narration. I invite you to click on that link in the show notes because I would love to have you as a part of that community as well. And as always, everybody is worthy to be loved. Everybody is worthy to be heard. Everybody has a story to tell, and I want to hear yours. So until I talk to you next time, dear listener, peace be with you.